establish norms for both individual and communal behavior. So you can think from Socrates to Locke, Rousseau, Kant, all of those suggesting that there's this concept and evolving this concept of a social contract. It emerges and begins to be baked into our political framework as well as the theories of justice, that there is a social contract that we need to follow, and lots of things are embedded in there, from current law to some differences among different political systems. I think we could also say that our Judaism was either ahead of the game or certainly running parallel and then ahead of the game, because it begins to suggest that these are not just opportunities and not just contractual, they're actually obligations. As we explore a sacred version of what secularly some people might refer to as a social contract, and we extract from both texts and from the kinds of stories and teachings that you're touching on, this concept of tikkun olam. So those two are, that's kind of how we, at least one of the ways I see that we're here. And Judaism takes the social contract well beyond the Western interpretation of that.
Thank you, Ron, so much. I wanted to, let me share my screen for a moment. I wanted to direct your attention to a particular prayer that we find in the Reform Siddur in the Shacharit service for Shabbat. Let me get there. Just a moment. Nope. Give me a moment. Almost there. Here we go. Elu Devarim. Does everyone see that on their screen?
Yes.
So this prayer, Elu Devarim she'en lehem shiur she'adam ochel peratehem ba'olam hazeh v'hakeren kayemet lo le'olam haba ve'elu hein. Okay, so there are these things, a whole list of things that are incredibly important for us. Mitzvot, actions, Jewish actions, that we could call, fall into the category of tikkun ha'olam. And they are honoring our parents and engaging in deeds of compassion and arriving early for study and dealing graciously with guests and visiting the sick, so on and so on. And the final phrase of this particular prayer reminds us, V'talmud Torah keneged kulam, that the study of Torah is equal to all of these and many other mitzvot. And I bring this up because the idea, the mystical idea that that religious acts would be akin to the social action involvement, social justice pursuit work that we are drawn to and engaged in. The idea for our sages was that if you are a student of Torah, all of those will become apparent and important because you will be studying and reminding yourselves of these imperatives all the time. So the idea that a religious act is not at all separate from an act of social justice, that in fact, I would say that the religious acts referred to in our mystical tradition as being part of tikkun ha'olam are in fact that the study of Torah leads to all of those acts that we think of as, caring for the impoverished and the homeless and the hungry and the disenfranchised. And so it wasn't a separation up in the mind of our sages that there was sort of this one category of tikkun olam and it was social justice work. It was that by engaging in a full and immersive Jewish life that included a rich and deep understanding and study of Torah, that you would naturally get there and be there because that's what it meant to live a Jewish life. Does that make sense? I'm going to pause just for questions or comments so far, or additions always from our the other rabbi on the call. Don't hesitate to jump in. All right, so okay, let me stop sharing this and bring you. Thank you, Ron, for taking us on a bird's eye flyover of what we discussed last week with regards to philosophical underpinnings. And now let me just remind you where we were with our texts. So we started last week by talking about, let me see if I can play this. I want to play my PowerPoint. I just need to go to view, right?
Here, you can go down there next to the minus, you see the minus and the plus, and you click. Do you see?
Where am I?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So next to the minus, to the there you go. There you go. That should work.
You, Rabbi. Okay.
I'm happy to serve as the IT person.
I appreciate it. Okay. These are the things, the classes I missed in seminary. So thankfully, Rabbi Kolek did not. All right. So we talked about the Exodus story, specifically what it is that we learn about ourselves. I'm flying through this, that we are born pure with pure souls. We talked about the prayer Eloheinu Shamash Natata Bi, that we were oppressed communally together, all of us. It was a shared experience, and we were redeemed collectively. It was a shared experience. And so we think of ourselves in communal ways. We are communal people. We are a communitarian tradition. As opposed to, we looked at the death and resurrection of Jesus and the idea that perhaps, and of course, not all Christians, it's a generalization to say that all Christians believe this, but the idea that I was born with a sinful soul that needs cleansing and purification, in contrast, and that I'm redeemed through baptism or faith and trust in Jesus. And my redemption is not contingent upon communal norms and the community. And then Ron took us, thank you, through the philosophical considerations, and we came to some Jewish texts. The first one we looked at last time was from Exodus. You shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the feelings of the stranger, having yourselves been strangers in the land of Egypt. Anybody who is a writer these days or an editor would say, why are you repeating the word stranger 3 times? That's just in this one verse. We know that repetition is, in fact, a device found within Torah for intentional reasons, and this is no different. That we are to be reminded of the stranger within ourselves, the stranger in front of us, the stranger in our midst at all times. We talked about this text, and then we went on to this piece from Leviticus about reaping the harvest of your land, that we should not reap all the way to the corners of our field. We shouldn't pick our vineyard bare or gather the fallen fruits of our vineyard. And we really ended on this text. And there were some interesting things, I think, that came out of our group discussion, like the idea of what does it mean to be greedy? That we even, it's not just enough to reap the harvest of our land, but we would even gather the fallen fruit. Like it's not enough to just even leave that. What were some of the other, does anybody remember what some of the other gleanings from this particular text were with us last week? Or last month? It all blends. Anybody remember what some of our takeaways were?
I remember us talking about the fact that which is already fallen is not the cream of the crop. And we considered why it would be suggested that we leave less than the best for others to reap.
Good memory, Janet. And what do we think about that? The idea that that which falls might be overripe or even partially rotted, and is it in fact the case that that's what we want to be leaving?
And I don't know if that's what the intention is.
Mm-hmm.
Being a gardener, that's what I think of. But
the other thing we talked about, as I remember it, is this is quite different than merely going ahead and completing the harvest and then delivering part of the harvest
Yeah.
to someone in need. This actually allows them to do some work at the same time, and therefore we're not being patronizing of that, but we're truly acting as a community and respecting their dignity.
Yes, so we did. Thank you, Ron. We talked about the different sort of levels, Maimonides, Rambam's levels of tzedakah, and the idea that if we can empower somebody else to be able to provide for themselves, that it's really one of the highest levels, the highest level of giving. So the idea that we wouldn't pick our vineyard bare or be so greedy or unaware that we would gather even the fallen fruit gives the opportunity for somebody to come either anonymously or just as part of the community and provide for themselves. Nice. Anything else that you remember?
We also spent a little bit of time on the very last line. So like, why is God reminding us at the end of this paragraph? And so we talked about how this is this is telling us how we can be God-like, but we must always remain humble because in the end, we are not God.
Nice recount, Arlene. Yes. We talked about that the whole purpose, if we go back to the holiness code in Leviticus, that we shall be holy because God is holy. And that is the sole purpose of our being. If you take it back to this idea of the Lurianic Kabbalistic tradition too, right? Of what is our job? It's to bring the light back together, eventually completely ridding ourselves of the physical material world, which is seen as lo tov, and not good, and returning to the divine presence. So yes, reminding ourselves that this is how we attain holiness, and that we in fact are not God. Nice. Anything else before we go on?
If I may, just to add to what has been said, I think that understanding that, the way the Torah comes back with those final lines in so many of these verses is also connected to this whole idea that many of the laws, especially the interpersonal laws that we see in the Torah, are in the context of I am the Lord who took you out of Egypt. And the idea is that this is an idea that Rabbi Shai Held from New York likes to share when he teaches about these subjects. One of the main goals of the Torah is that we will be able to develop and to build a society that is like the anti-Egypt. So many of these laws are to be understood as the roadmap for the construction of a society that is the opposite of what we saw, learned, suffered while in Egypt as slaves. So when the Torah gives us all these bunch of laws and closes every piece of those laws with I am Adonai your God, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, or you shall be holy, or those types of endings that come back all the time, it is because it's the ongoing reminder and the repetition on top of the repetition of the type of society that we are told not to replicate, and that is also connected to the ongoing journey towards the promised land. That is where we are going. That functions as the horizon and functions the same way as the holiness works in our tradition, because the commandment or the invitation to be holy is always phrased on the future. You shall be holy, as a way of guiding our actions. But the truth is that the main insight that comes from the Torah, and this is actually one of the problems with Korach and his revolt, is that we never get to be holy. Holiness is the horizon. Holiness is the north on our compass, but every time you get closer to the horizon moves away. So it's a never-ending path towards perfecting ourselves and learning new lessons and engaging with life in a different way. And the last thing I'm going to say before I promise to remain silent for a couple of minutes at least is in specific to this text that we are reading from Leviticus 19 and to many texts that are related to the land, the Torah reminds us all the time that we are not the owners of the land. And so we that may think that because it is our tree and our fruits, those belong to us as a property, the final insight of the Torah is that we are never to be understood or to understand ourselves as the owners of the land, Kili kol haaretz, because God says, because the earth is mine, it's not yours. So in this sense of learning how to detach from the paradigms of measuring people for what they own, the Torah comes and says you're not the owner. In any best case scenario, you are the lessee of the land, but just understand that you may have a better share of that lease, but we are all in the same condition. So just be mindful of that. And again, because otherwise you are replicating Egypt by other means, which is what we shouldn't be doing to begin with. Done.
Go ahead.
I have a follow-up question. Is this would explain another meaning for Shnat Shemitah beside the agricultural, just to remind us that we lease the
100%.
land?
Yes. So when you read the laws of Shemitah at the end of the book of Leviticus, you will see the same principle in action.
Rabbi, will you just explain Shemitah for anybody who doesn't know? I can, but you feel free.
It's really came from the excuse we given is agricultural, that every 7 years we have to give the land rest, and we cannot reap any in order to rejuvenate the land, to let it rejuvenate itself. So I was just saying that this is another view to remind us that it's not ours.
Correct. And the truth is that I think, if I remember correctly, that that the Torah itself
mentions that?
Yes, but
oh, okay.
But again, it's like let's continue.
Okay.
I'm reading it. It's Leviticus 25. So let me check on the text while you, Lori,
okay,
can share the next slide, or we can.
Okay, we're going.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah. Anybody else before we move on? Okay. Yep, Rick.
Bob.
Oh, Bob. Sorry, I didn't see.
Okay, one thing that rereading Exodus, one thing that really stuck out to me was the golden calf.
Yep, and we're coming up to that parsha in just a couple of weeks, Ki Tisa. And tell me what about that in particular?
Well, only that we had just experienced it in our country.
You're making a political reference. Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the process that sends it off center, and it happened almost as soon as they got on the other side.
Well, certainly the particular story of the golden calf brings up these issues of materialism, and when we are spiritually impatient and we begin to think that we can tangibly capture, own, wrap our arms around, in fact, what is, as Rabbi Kolik said, out on the horizon, this notion of sacredness and holiness. So it is a strong reminder. And, I mean, the thing about Torah is it also reminds us parsha after parsha that we are, we are broken in many ways. We are human. That's what it means to be human, that we are in ourselves in need of seeking repair at all times and restoring our own souls. We are in need. That's the Shemitah of Shabbat, right? That every week
Right.
if not just that one day, we require that for the reflection and introspection and repentance. We again, and I know all of us are part of different religious backgrounds within Judaism and practice today, but in the Reform movement, we really keep our repenting to specific, annual occurrences, namely Yom Kippur. And we've really excised a lot of those prayers out of our weekly Sidurim, our weekly prayer books, and so we don't become as practiced at perhaps looking as inward as often as we might otherwise do. So I'm probably off on a tangent now, but let's go to our next text.
Now, but actually gave me enough time to go through the texts. So if just so on the question of Shemitah, if you it's like if you look on Leviticus 25, the Shemitah, which is the 7th year in which the land had to rest, which is connected to a cycle of 7 times 7, guiding to the 50th year, which is the year of the Jubilee. In the Jubilee, everything was like hitting the reset button and going back to square zero. And there is a verse over there. Again, if you want, I can share my screen just for a moment. I don't know.
Yeah. Go ahead, Rabbi.
Just so when you see in 25th or chapter 25, and it says ve'aretz lo timacher litzmitut, you cannot sell the land forever.
Very good.
Because that is what I said before. The earth is mine, says God, and it connects it. Kigerim betoshavim atem imadi. You need to understand yourselves as gerim betoshavim. So you are strangers, residents with me. You are not the owners of the land. So this idea of selling or buying in perpetuity doesn't actually make any sense in this context. And now, just if you give me only 1 second.
You could take 5.
It's okay. It's here. Do you see this other text from Exodus? I don't know if you are. Am I?
No, we're still on Leviticus 25 with you.
Okay. Give me 1 second.
Take your time.
Don't go away. I'm still in Leviticus 25.
Yep.
But again, I want just to show you, because this was actually read in the Torah this last Shabbat, Parashat Mishpatim, where we read also about the Shemitah. 6 years you shall sow your land and gather in its yield, but in the 7th you shall let it rest. Let the needy among you people eat of it. So there is not only the ecological, agricultural insight of let the land rest, it is also in connection with helping those who are in need. Okay. And again, it's like all of this is connected right before. You shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the feeling of the stranger, having yourself be strangers in the land of Egypt. All the time, all of these laws that are related to the land and our ownership of the land, which is we are not the owners, are always connected to the feeling of we ourselves are strangers in the land. And by the Torah is always calling us in the reflection of maybe by understanding ourselves as strangers, we may be able to develop more empathy towards those who are strangers in our midst. Because again, all of us left Egypt. All of us know what does it mean to be the marginalized. And under that conceptual mindset, we should guide the way in which we build the society that the Torah is trying to push for.
Thank you, Rabbi. All right. we're going to move to a Talmudic text. Oh, I can't see any of you. Can everybody still see me?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's good. Let me just,
What
do you still see or no?
What do you see?
Okay, wait, hold on. Well, I see the text, but I don't see any of you.
Can you stop? Did you stop sharing?
Yeah,
you need to share your screen.
Okay, here we go. Look at that. I am obviously not on my tech game this morning, but you all are, so that's good. There we go.
That's where we're together.
We're strong. It's the communitarian version of teaching.
Right.
Everybody helps us along. All right, this is not where I want it to be. We're going back. Here we go. Okay, so bringing a text, BT at the top of the page stands for the Babylonian Talmud versus the Yerushalmi. We have two Talmuds, and it's not that one is better than or more important than the other. We find ourselves often learning from the Babylonian Talmud, perhaps more than the Yerushalmi, but nonetheless, I know this is not a class on the difference between the two, but just pointing out so you would know what they mean. And then every page of Talmud has an A and a B. If you imagine having an open book and you would have the right-hand side of the page and the left-hand side of the page, so too, we would number those two different numbers. In our Talmud, they'd both be 61. One would be 61A, one would be 61B. Okay, so we get this text. We must provide help for the non-Jewish poor, as well as for the Jewish poor, right? And we can look at the Hebrew. That's because people are often asking, well, what is that word specifically? Nochrim, non-Jewish. It's doesn't even have the word Jewish in it, but it just connotes somebody who is other or of another. I mean, I think we often translate it as Christian, but it's not that. It's
like a Gentile. It would be like
a Gentile. Yeah,
Gentile, right.
Yes, good. We must visit non-Jews when they are sick, as well as our fellow Jews when they are sick, and we must attend to the burial of their dead, as well as the burial of our own dead, for these are the ways of peace. Okay, let's declare this open season on Gittin 61A and share your thoughts. What strikes you as heartwarming, unusual, frustrating, confusing?
Darkei Shalom is wonderful.
Right, and so these are the ways of peace, right? Darkei Shalom.
Inclusiveness. Just seeing everybody as human.
Nice. And notice, Hannah, because you pointed out those closing words of the statement, Darkei Shalom, ways of peace. And in fact, it's Mipnei Darkei Shalom. So in light of, or in lieu of the phrase we've come to know Mipnei Olam, here we have Darkei Shalom. And is there a difference between Mipnei Tikkun HaOlam for the sake of the repair of the world versus for the sake of the ways of peace? Why would those not be? Are those interchangeable? Are they not?
No, they're not.
Why are they not?
Because the Darkei Shalom is the way for peace. It's very specific toward, Shalom is Shalem, so it has a little bit, it's a little bit similar to Tikkun Olam, which means that we want to make it into the full, what it should be, to repair it. We're repairing it. We're repairing the Olam. But this is more specific in thinking of not repairing. It's the work, it's the way that you go. I like this a lot better than repairing. That something is broken and you have to repair it. It's not, we're not that big that we are able to repair. We can maybe contribute a little bit to do some good. The Darkei Shalom is the way to peace, meaning we have to go on the way. And that's one of the ways.
Thank you, Hannah. Rabbi, if you still have your Sefaria open, would you, like in the way of a concordance, just pull up mipnei darchei shalom. Let's see if it looks like a distinct category that's separate from tikkun olam. See if there's any trend there. Meanwhile, yes, please.
So one thing that strikes me about mipnei darchei shalom versus mipnei tikkun olam is that this is getting us to look broader. It's not just our own. We're not just taking care of our own. It's specifically saying you take care of the Jew and the non-Jew. And I think also it's interesting if this is when we were in exile. We were the outcasts. We were not the majority society. But it's saying even in the case where you're the minority and you're the oppressed and you're the stranger, you're still reaching out to the larger community. And I think that kind of helps avoid the the fifth column kind of perception, with Pharaoh saying, well, the Jews are getting too numerous and then they're going to take over us of, well, we're contributing to the overall society. We're not doing anything for ourselves that we are not also doing for you. So that's where it's like it's a lot more present tense of we're trying to build a society together now currently versus what Rabbi Kulik was saying about tikkun olam is it's always that horizon, the goal we're reaching for that we'll never get to.
So thank you for pointing that out, because you made me remember that Rabbi Elliot Dorff, who was with our community not too long ago, always talks about these concentric circles of outreach, that we need to take care of our immediate family first, and then we take care of our Jewish community next, and then we move outward. And he doesn't say that it's not imperative upon us to take care of the circles that move beyond our Jewish community. It was just, he offers a prioritized triage chart, if you will.
But wouldn't you say that this passage would not support prioritizing or hierarchy? That this is saying we have to take care of everyone. It isn't. We must first take care of the Jewish poor and then the non-Jewish poor.
Well, so it's a good question. I would say that this text certainly doesn't prioritize, but the Talmud, as any Jewish book is actually a library. So the book has many voices. And so there are other texts also in the Talmud that will present a clear prioritization of who should you serve first. So which again, maybe the question today is less important, but let's try to understand the question of the priorities in their context. Mm-hmm. When the means are limited, the question for the priority is a fair question that has moral implications. So if you don't have money or resources to help everyone, who should you help first? And the idea in those texts that are also to be found in the Talmud is this idea that Lori was speaking about, Rabbi Dorff, the concentric circles that begin with the members of your household, the members of your family, the members of your people, and so forth, and then it expands. But again, the Talmud plays some of that game all the time, like not only in terms of money and helping the Jews against the non-Jews, but just as an example, there is a conversation in the Talmud regarding if you have only money to buy candles for Shabbat or candles for Hanukkah. Let's say it's Hanukkah. What do? You have money only to buy one candle. Which blessing should you say? The blessing for Shabbat or the blessing for Hanukkah? And the answer that the Talmud will give, Bob, let's do first. I will give you the answer, but before I give you the answer, what do you think is the right answer and why? Let's play like the Talmud's game. It's
Hanukkah,
Shabbat of
'cause
Hanukkah. It's the
because
Shabbat
it's a
of Hanukkah.
celebration.
So Ron, you say the if you need to choose on that special Shabbat between the Shabbat candle and the Hanukkah candle, you will do the blessing for Hanukkah because of the celebration of Hanukkah.
I would say Shabbat.
I would say
Shabbat.
Shabbat.
I say Shabbat.
What I am more interested is in your justification.
Because,
Okay.
because
Shabbat is one of the commandments to honor Shabbat, and Hanukkah doesn't have that priority. So,
Okay.
and Shabbat
Anyone
is,
else?
and Shabbat is, it's every week. It's
Right.
part of the way in which you honor your and practice your Judaism. And also Hanukkah is a minor holiday. You needed to pick Pesach. You needed, I mean, it just needed to be more.
He didn't actually write the original text. He might have written it differently.
I don't
My
get
question
presents at
is-
Pesach, only at Hanukkah do I get presents.
Hanukkah's a
My
historic
question is, does the candle have to burn all the way down, or can you extinguish it and then light it again?
No, you can't extinguish it because it's Shabbat. So it's like you
Right.
choose one and you let it go. What I will give you the answer in a moment, but I'm sure the nice thing about this exercise is that it shows you that you could probably go both ways and find reasons to go both ways. And again, when you don't have the resources, sometimes you have to make decisions based on priorities, based on your values. The rabbis, on the question of Hanukkah against Shabbat, will decide that if you have only money for one candle, remember it was like wick and oil, so it's
Then
not the
Hanukkah.
wax oil, the wax
Then it
type
would be
candle.
Hanukkah.
You do the Shabbat candle. Now, why do you do it? Because according to Jewish law, you cannot use the light of the Hanukkah candle for anything. That's one of the reasons we put the shamash, by the way. The extra is just in case we use that light for purposes that are not allowed, we can always blame the shamash. But the point that the rabbis are making is that we decide to say the blessing on the Shabbat candle, mipnei shlom bait. So it's not the darkei shalom, the peace of the world, but the priority is given to the Shabbat candle because that is an investment in the peace of the house, of the home, because you can get to eat a meal or using the light of the Shabbat candle next to your family. You can see them, you can engage in conversation with them. And so once again, the idea of a peaceful home is trumping everything else. So today, again, because of the resources and because of electricity, the conversation is more theoretical than anything else, but it's a window into the process of finding what are the values hiding behind the decisions that they made then, that are also reflected in this type of text, inviting us to make sure that we are also helping those who are not members of our people.
And I want to point out from the text that we just came from in Leviticus, Arlene, that it doesn't say that we are first to offer our fields out and then collect our own harvest. The wording is such that when we have collected, reaped the harvest of our fruits, we must also remember to leave this portion, the corners, and not to gather that which is fallen. And so, but I think just you bring up something that is very present in the Jewish community, which is a discomfort that some, and I'm not suggesting that you or others on this call, on this Zoom class feel this way, but there are those, and we see it certainly within, I think, kind of the younger generation that are uncomfortable with this idea of Jewish community first, or Judaism first, and then others next. That even if there is plenty to go around, and we're not making decisions about that, are based on rationing and a shortage of resources, it's still this discomfort with like a Jewish pride that would say, this is who we are and we come first. And I think if we wanted to sort of psychoanalyze that, way of thinking. I'm looking at Ron when I say psychoanalyze, because I know that gets him going, ooh, we're going to psychoanalyze. That part of it is that now that we, or at this time in history, despite the spikes in anti-Semitism, despite the marchers in Charlottesville, chanting "Jews will not replace us," we still appreciate and experience a relative level of comfort, despite still being a minority, of inclusion, of being welcomed in the larger society. And as soon as that happens, the sociological sort of pendulum shifts. And instead of advocating for us to be first or to take care of ourselves, we quickly become uncomfortable with the idea that it would be perceived that we prioritize or value or, create a hierarchy in which we are above others. And it's not so different with Israel. I find that, the idea for many Jews of a Jewish state or a Jewish person, in this case an Israeli, who is strong and confident and able to defend themselves, once upon a time would have been a dream come true when we were, getting our tails whipped from behind. But today creates a lot of discomfort for people. So I think that's part of kind of the psychology behind it. But how do others feel about that?
I think is very prevalent in the younger generation. For instance, my children, very social, very strong socialistic tendencies of, very strong equality. And, so there's a lot of things, about, putting Jews first, certainly putting Israel first,
because they're lucky. They're lucky. They never had to deal.
Oh, they know their privilege. They're very aware.
They don't until you really,
Excuse me, ma'am. My father was a Holocaust survivor. My children understand.
My parents too. I'm just saying it's not the same as experiencing actual feeling that you're not. They feel here very free and they feel very equal.
And that was to my point. You're exactly saying what I was trying to point out, which is just that it's one thing to kind of live it and experience it, another thing to have it be in the abstract. And I can tell my children all day long, you're so lucky. You can't imagine what it must be like to not live with the comfort of knowing you have a Jewish state that you can go to. You can't imagine what it might be like to every day be nervous about leaving the house. You couldn't wear a kippah, you might be, attacked or whatever it might be. So yes, but bringing the conversation back, Arlene, to this idea of kind of prioritization, where does that sit comfort-wise with the idea that you would, to use the cliche, put on your oxygen mask first so that you then have the wherewithal to help others get theirs on as well?
That's interesting the way you're putting it, but I want to go back to the screen that we have in front of us. And it says, first, we have to make sure that we provide for the poor of the strangers with the Israel, meaning it's equal. Mm-hmm. We have to provide for both. There is no prioritizing. Next comes the visiting of the sick, which is the same thing, prioritizing between the stranger and the Israelites. And the last one is about the dead. And I find it's really interesting. It's providing, then making sure that during the life, when the person is finally living and able to live, then they get sick, you have to take care of that. And then the end is death. And we still need to not prioritize between the dead of the stranger. And even though in all that text, the strangers come first.
So, Hannah,
in the mentioning.
Yeah, and I'm glad you did, because I read it differently. I read it, and the Hebrew is far more vague than the English translation, which is always the case, right? And the English is just a translation, and so it would be interesting, to know the intention of the person who did this particular translating. But the idea of im, which is the Hebrew, with, we must provide help for the non-Jewish poor with the Jewish poor. I could read that as, we're helping the Jewish poor, so we have to remember to also help the non-Jewish poor. We're helping the Jewish sick, so we have to also remember to attend. It's not so clear. It's interesting, though. I think the way in which we read a text, and this comes back to Rabbi Kolek's comment, the way we read a text, the way we relate to God, reflects our values. And what, so if I think of the divine as reflective of all people, regardless of their sexuality, their skin color, their language, I mean, so on and so forth, well, that reflects my own personal values about inclusivity, that I would think that that's representative or reflective of God. And so I think the way we read a text, we bring our own moral compass to that text.
Yeah, but naturally, every person thinks of themselves first. So we don't have to be reminded of ourselves. And that's why I think the stranger is mentioned first, and then us, because us, we don't have to remind.
Okay, nice. I like that. Others? Rick?
Just getting to topic, I guess the question I have from looking at the two things we put up there today is it possible to repair the world if all you were concerned with is your own kind? And I thought the message I was seeing is that the need to look way beyond yourself if you really want to repair the world and make the world a better place.
Which I think that you are right, and in the Jewish tradition there is always the look beyond the borders of those who are part of our tribe. Again, I think that one of the biggest challenges, and I think that is also part of what we see today in this ongoing tension between the particular and the universal, the question is, repairing the world can become such a humongous task that you don't know where to begin. So the original context of the conversation with the priorities that doesn't show up in this text but shows up in other texts, as we were saying before, is if you have limited resources, which part of a very broken world do you fix first? That's the conversation. I think that the end game for classic Jewish insight would be to repair the whole world, right, and to allow for the salvation of humanity. I think that you from the first slides, maybe you spoke about this the last class that I wasn't here, but in Judaism, salvation, or as it is usually known, redemption, is always collective. It's not like you save yourself and then good luck with the rest. So the end game is to repair the whole world. The question is, where do you start?
Yeah. I believe the corollary to Tikkun Olam is not to get frustrated that you have to complete the job, but you can also not defer. You have to maintain the obligation. So it's like your statement earlier, Rabbi Joshua, that the goalposts continue to move. And you have to be ready for that. And you're not going to get there, and that's okay, but you can't walk off the field.
Correct.
You've got to keep going. There's also, and this is perhaps for another time, Rabbi Laurie, but there is a parallel study of, and over decades, of levels of pursuing ethical reasoning. And it always starts with a level of looking at yourself suggested earlier, but it doesn't stay there. To really evolve your level of reasoning, it moves through. In fact, it moves all the way beyond just looking beyond our laws and customs, but looking at a greater good, and even at a greater good that has a sacred aspect or feel to it as well. So this is what you said earlier, I think really is the backdrop for this. These goalposts move, priorities change, and reflecting on that and operating within that is part of our obligation.
So what I'd like to do, thank you, Ron, is I promised a few people, and Arlene already jumped off, that we wouldn't go much past 1 today and they didn't want to miss the conversation. I'd like to wrap up our conversation now, remind you that our next session will be on the 25th of March. That's keeping it on Thursday at noon. And let's pick up there, Ron, where you just left off with us, or I'll just rename you Rabbi Tarfon. And let's go from there. We'll return back to our one text that we came to today, but I love that. It's great. And we'll go on. And please feel free to invite others to this conversation. I think it's a really worthwhile one. So I hope you'll tell your friends and colleagues about it and have them join us. So thanks, everybody. I did manage to record most of this. It's a miracle.
Wonderful.
And